It's DisneyCember 2024, and I feel like I always start off these DisneyCembers by asking this question: what's left? I'm not talking about the fact that Disney's had some difficult couple of years, so they are starting to get a little better. I'm talking about what's new to add to DisneyCember. I mean, we've just added so many. Star Wars, Marvel, Pixar, even Hollywood Pictures somehow worked its way into the mix. What new element can I add? Well, for a while, a lot of people have been pointing out that Miramax is technically under Disney's name. And yes, while that is true, I kinda said a while ago when I accepted the Fox movies that I wasn't gonna do ones before Disney took them over because it would just look weird seeing something like Alien with the DisneyCember logo there. And I thought Miramax, with a lot of its more adult-themed movies, kinda fell into that situation. But the more I thought about it, what the hell's wrong with me? That would look hilarious. The Crow, Clerks, Pulp Fiction with that little DisneyCember logo there kinda looks amazing the more I look at it. And I can't pretend Disney hasn't also gone really grisly over the years, so yeah, screw it. Let's talk about the Miramax films. There's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about, a lot of classics, and even a few blunders. Did you know technically the Tom and Jerry movie was released by Miramax? That is wild. For a short bit of time, Tom and Jerry was under the Disney umbrella. That is so bizarre to me. But on top of that, we're gonna look over all the stuff you're used to seeing from DisneyCember, the anime movies, Pixar, video games, Fox, the works. And as usual, bits of movie I've talked about either on Vlog or Untitled Review Show, I'm gonna talk about again here and include spoilers, and also say whether or not my thoughts on it have changed. Even if it isn't especially old, but like I said, people can change their minds in a short bit of time. Like every year, I'm so excited to go over all these, and I'm so excited y'all are coming along with me on this journey. It really means a lot you stick around every year. So, let's begin DisneyCember 2024, the Miramax edition. Plus maybe a bajillion other things. Well, I mentioned Pulp Fiction before, so let's start off with it. Honestly, this film is so celebrated, so talked about, so admired, it's almost hard to find anything new to say about it. But sometimes that's kind of the fun. You look at something that's so big, you take it for granted, and you almost forget about it because it's so big. So you look at it years later and you analyze whether it's as good as everyone said when it came out, or is it worth all the hype, or if some parts have aged well and some parts haven't. Because I think it's an understatement to say everybody was imitating this movie after it came out. To some extent, they're still imitating this movie. When you think of a film about people with guns told out of order having these quirky conversations that almost sound like conversations you would have in real life, and oh yeah, maybe wear black suits, they're trying to imitate Pulp Fiction. At the time, really nothing quite like this had been seen. Like, okay, there certainly have been movies that were told out of order, and there have been movies that had dialogue that sounded more realistic and talked about more everyday things. But combining those elements together along with a bunch of stuff the director just seems to like exploitation films and pulp magazines and philosophy and fast food and retro nostalgia and even some samurai imagery in there, it's pretty much a geeky college student making a movie that has everything he loves in it. But that geeky college student was so talented, he managed to get everybody on board. Everybody was fascinated by this movie because it was so different, and it was so energized, and it was so fun, but it also had a lot of depth to it, and a lot of questions, and a lot of theories. Like I said, it is told out of order, but it's also several different stories, but they have a lot of characters that bleed over into those stories. One of them is about Jules and Vincent, and following their lives as hitmen. Another is about Vincent and Mia, who's tasked by his boss to take her out and show her a good time. And another is about Butch, who's a fighter who works for the same boss and is trying to run away. So as you can already see, these aren't just random characters and random stories. Everything has a little bit of a connection back to something else. And I would go into more detail about what happens in this movie, but honestly, it kind of be ruining things. Like, okay, there's some things I know everybody's aware of. We all know the dance sequence between John Travolta and Uma Thurman. We all know Samuel L. Jackson taking out a guy while quoting the Bible. We all know that great speech from Christopher Walken about the watch. There's some things that are just so big, they've worked their way into iconic pop culture. But honestly, if you haven't seen the rest of this movie, you really shouldn't know anything else about it. One of my favorite movie moments is I was showing this film to my family. I'm the only one that saw it at that time. And my mom actually said at one point, "I think I know what's gonna happen." And I said, "No, you don't. If you can actually figure out what's gonna happen in this movie, you are deranged, demented, just something's wrong with you, because no logical person should be able to predict what happens in this film. At least, not to the extent of the details." And And I think that plays to the fact that the style of the movie goes back and forth between being very sporadic but also very consistent. Again, you can kind of connect all these things to just what a geeky film school nerd is into. But there's a lot of things that people can relate to or latch onto in a similar way that, say, George Lucas combined a lot of things he likes in Star Wars, myth, and Flash Gordon, and old serials, and sci-fi. There's just a bunch of stuff he's mixing together that has a broad appeal to it. And I think the unexpected twists and turns this movie has, combined with conversations that most people do have at some point, or something very similar, and characters that are very complex and very interesting and very fun to listen to and watch, does pull a lot of people in. This movie gives an audience something they didn't know they wanted to see. Like, yeah, sure, everybody knows John Travolta as this big star now, and sure, he was in the 70s, but he kinda wasn't doing much around this time. Everybody points to this film as the movie that brought him back, and also introduced us to Samuel L. Jackson, which, yes, we've seen in other films, but man, this made him a star. This movie made quite a few people big stars. And a big part of that is, yes, they all are doing a good job in the performances, but they're also all written really well. One minute, you could be talking about McDonald's. The next, you could be cleaning somebody's brains out of a car, or dancing at an old retro restaurant, or fighting somebody off with a samurai sword. But what makes the film a classic all these years later is, yes, there's a lot of energy and a lot of unexpected things that happen, and a lot of likable characters and writing, but there is some real depth going on in this movie. Like, this film has been analyzed to death, and it's still being analyzed, and it should be. There's so many things you can read into it. There's so many things I'm still finding out about this movie. The main focus seems to be around redemption and salvation, which, yeah, is a very common theme in movies, but this one analyzes it in a pretty fun and unique way. The main three people you follow, Vincent, Jules, and Butch, are all in a world of crime doing bad things, and they all are likable to some extent, but there's also different levels to how much they're in that world of crime and how much they're willing to let that bad side of them take them over. Vincent is very comfortable in this world and mostly stays the same. Butch is very uncomfortable and tries to get out of this world. And Jules is right smack in the middle. He's very comfortable in this world. Hell, he kind of enjoys it, but then halfway through, he starts to change his mind and wants to get out. All three of these characters and stories are very interesting, and the way they end are equally interesting. With Vincent and Butch, you get a very definitive ending. With Jules, you really don't. It's kind of left open in the air what happens to him. And that is intentional, because he's the one that's in the middle now and trying to figure out what he's gonna do. There's a ton of little things you can continue to read into with this. Like, I never put together every time Vincent goes to the bathroom, something bad happens. I just never made that connection until now. Why is that? I don't know. It could have a deeper meaning, or maybe it's just something kind of funny that Quentin Tarantino liked. You can honestly read into either one. It's just that kind of movie. And I think the reason it's told out of order does complement that, because I do wonder what this movie would be like if it was told in chronological order. My guess is it would still be good, but it wouldn't be as interesting. I feel like this movie really finds the most interesting moments when you want to see them, and it delivers it to you. Like, I think after you get that clear ending with Vincent and a clear ending with Butch, it should be followed with a more open ending with Jules. You had two extreme outcomes with two extreme characters, and now here's one that's a bit more vague. And after all the extreme insanity that you've seen, this feels right. And it wouldn't feel right if it was in the middle of the movie. Some people nowadays do see some of these moments as going on too long, particularly with the conversations that don't really connect to anything, and to some extent I kind of agree. Back then, this was kind of new. You didn't really hear this kind of writing often, and you could very much argue it's building up to something. It does show what this life is like. There are a lot of moments where you're just sitting around and doing nothing and shooting the shit, and other times where you're just trying to clean up after the violence you caused, even if it was a mistake. But because this style has been mimicked so much, I can see people maybe looking at these moments and being a little bored by them, because we have seen a lot more writing like this after this film. The only moment I call bullshit on is Quentin Tarantino's character constantly using the N-word, which, make no mistake, I think he uses this word very well with his characters. I mean, if you were to take that word out of Django Unchained, it wouldn't really feel right, and I don't think it would feel right here, but even back then, when some white people said it as a joke, like they didn't really think many people were using that word for the original intent of that word, you know, and using the soft ending and everything, this felt weird. Why is Jules even friends with this dweeb? Maybe I missed something there, but I just did not see a reason why this guy was in this movie outside of Quentin wanting to give himself a role. Again, I could totally be missing something. I'm not gonna act like I'm an expert on this, but even back then, it felt off. But still, I'm really not exaggerating when I say pretty much for about 10 years after this film came out, there was at least 2 independent movies trying to imitate what this film was doing. And honestly, several more in big Hollywood. Like, I don't even think it was just independent movies. This film really did explode, and it deserved to explode. It launched the career of Quentin Tarantino, which, yes, he was known for Reservoir Dogs, but it didn't have nearly the impact this movie did. In fact, I think a lot of people say Reservoir Dogs was kind of training wheels for Pulp Fiction. And all these years later, people are still studying it and finding new things to discover. I wish I could break the mold and be that one film nerd that says, it's overhyped and overpraised, people talk about it too much, but there really is a reason for it. Sometimes you just can't dispute it. It's like Citizen Kane, it's like The Seventh Seal, it's like all these classics. There really is so much to explore. But it's also one of the few films that can be entertaining to the common viewer too, people who aren't looking for anything that deep, they just want to be entertained. It's a great movie for great reasons. And hopefully we're going to be looking at a lot more great movies, as DisneyCember is just getting started.